Emma, an 8-year-old girl with cute brown hair tied in 2 braids, is an innocent, lively, and energetic child. She lives with her mother, Grace, in a cozy little apartment on the outskirts of the city. Although their family isn't wealthy, they always find happiness in the simple moments spent together. Grace is a strong, loving mother who does everything she can to raise her daughter well. But recently, their lives have become more stressful than ever as Grace is being sued by a neighbor over an unresolved property dispute. Although she tries to remain strong, Grace can't hide the anxiety in her eyes. She has said very little to Emma about the case, only assuring her that everything will be fine and that the people at the courthouse will help. However, Emma senses the tension in the air, and even though she doesn't fully understand the nature of the lawsuit, she feels a certain unease in her heart. "Mom, everything will be okay, right?" Emma asked, her sweet voice tinged with concern. Grace smiled and reassured her daughter, trying to mask her worry. "Of course, sweetheart. I just want you to feel at ease, there's nothing to worry about." But even though her mother tried to comfort her, Emma still felt uneasy when she saw the worry in her mother's face, a smile that didn't seem as bright as it used to be. On the day of the trial, Emma and Grace arrived at the courthouse. The large room with stiff wooden chairs and the serious-looking lawyers and judges made Emma feel out of place. Although everyone in the courtroom was focused on the case, Emma tried to make her mother feel better with her cheerful stories. She didn't fully understand what was going on, but she could tell her mother was very tense. "Mom, everything will be okay, won't it?" Emma asked again, her voice full of sweetness and concern. Grace smiled at her again, trying to hide her worry. "It will, sweetheart. Everything will be fine." But Emma could still feel that something was off. When it was the judge's turn to speak, Emma didn't realize that he was asking an important legal question. The judge looked down at the young girl with a kind smile, trying to lighten the tense atmosphere in the courtroom. He asked, "What would you order if you could decide everything here?" With her innocent misunderstanding of the word order, Emma confidently replied, "1 cheeseburger, please." Her serious response to a legal question caused a brief silence in the courtroom before everyone burst into laughter. The tension that had been hanging in the air dissipated, replaced by warm smiles and a sense of relief. Emma, not understanding why everyone was laughing, simply felt happy that she had made people smile. Her mother, Grace, couldn't hold back her laughter either, and the worry she had carried with her seemed to lift just a little. The courtroom was a stark contrast to the warm, cozy atmosphere of Emma's home. With its towering wooden walls, long rows of stiff chairs, and the serious faces of lawyers and officials, the room felt cold and intimidating to the young girl. Emma sat quietly next to her mother, fidgeting in her seat, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar world around her. She glanced at Grace, noticing the subtle signs of stress in her mother's face, the slight crease between her eyebrows, the way she kept adjusting her glasses as if trying to focus on something far away. The case had been going on for what felt like hours. The arguments seemed complicated, filled with words Emma didn't understand: evidence, testimony, defense. She tried her best to follow along, but nothing made sense to her. She shifted in her seat and looked around at the people in the courtroom. Some were writing on notepads, others were whispering quietly to their lawyers. It all seemed so formal, so far removed from her simple world of school, playgrounds, and cartoons. In an attempt to ease Emma's nerves, Grace whispered softly, "It's okay, sweetie. We're almost done. Just try to relax." But Emma couldn't relax. She felt the weight of the serious discussions and the way her mother's fingers nervously tapped the wooden armrest of her chair. It was then that she heard the judge's voice, booming and authoritative as he addressed the courtroom. "Now, before we move forward, I'd like to ask our young guest here a question," Judge Wilson said with a kind smile, looking down at Emma. His tone was soft, but there was an underlying seriousness to his words. "Little one, what would you order if you could decide everything here today?" Emma's eyes widened in surprise. She looked up at her mother, who was sitting quietly, unsure of how to respond. The question seemed odd, but Emma's mind quickly processed it in the way she knew best, through her love of food. Her face brightened as she heard the word order, and she immediately thought of the times she and Grace had gone out to eat together at the local diner. Order? Oh, I know. Emma thought to herself, excited to finally have an answer. She smiled brightly and, without hesitation, said, "1 cheeseburger, please." The entire courtroom fell silent for a moment. Emma's innocent response, delivered with such seriousness, hung in the air. She had misunderstood the judge's question entirely, thinking it was simply about choosing something from a menu. To her, order was just something you did when you were hungry, and she didn't realize it was meant to be a metaphor for making decisions or commands. Grace's eyes widened in embarrassment. She quickly looked at the judge, then at the other lawyers and audience members, who were beginning to chuckle. Emma, still unaware of her mistake, smiled proudly, believing she had answered the question correctly. The confusion in the room only grew as the sound of laughter started to ripple through the courtroom. Even the judge, a man known for his stern demeanor, couldn't help but laugh at the pure innocence of the moment. He chuckled softly and leaned into the microphone, saying, "Well, I suppose we can't argue with that choice. A cheeseburger sounds like a fine order." Grace, though flustered, couldn't help but let out a small laugh as well. Emma, oblivious to the mix-up, just grinned, feeling pleased that her answer had made people laugh. It was a small, light-hearted moment that broke through the heaviness of the situation and, for a brief moment, allowed the courtroom to breathe a little easier. The silence in the courtroom that followed Emma's innocent response was brief but palpable. For a moment, everyone seemed caught between confusion and amusement, unsure of how to react. Emma, still smiling with pride, looked around at the people who had begun to chuckle softly. She thought to herself, "I did good. I answered the judge's question." Her little face radiated with the same joy she felt when her parents praised her for doing well in school. However, Grace felt a wave of embarrassment flood over her. She quickly glanced at the judge, who was now smiling widely, clearly entertained by Emma's innocent misunderstanding. Grace's cheeks flushed slightly as she whispered, "I'm so sorry, she thought you were asking her to pick something to eat." The judge, with a warm, almost fatherly smile, waved off her concern. "No need to apologize, Mrs. Grace," he said, his voice steady but gentle. "It's just a little misunderstanding. Happens all the time." He leaned forward on the bench, chuckling softly. "But, Emma, that sounds like a delicious choice. I'll have to remember that for lunch." His tone lightened the atmosphere, and the room, which had been tense and heavy just moments before, seemed to relax as laughter filled the air. The lawyers, who had been engaged in serious discussions moments earlier, now looked at each other and exchanged amused glances. Some couldn't help but smile at the simplicity of the moment. The audience, too, joined in the laughter, appreciating the humor brought by the young girl's unintentional innocence. Emma, completely unaware of how the room had shifted, continued to beam with pride. It wasn't until a few moments later that Emma's confusion began to clear up. She noticed the odd looks people were giving her, their smiles mixed with curiosity. She frowned slightly, unsure of why her simple answer had made everyone laugh. Was she being funny? She had only said what she thought was the right answer. Grace, seeing her daughter's confusion, leaned down and whispered to her, trying to clear things up without drawing too much attention. "Sweetheart, when the judge said order, he didn't mean food. He meant, well, something like a decision, or a command. It's like when someone gives an order, like telling people what to do. He didn't want you to pick a cheeseburger." Emma blinked, her young mind processing the new information. "Oh," she said, a little embarrassed now. Her cheeks flushed, but she quickly recovered, looking up at the judge. "I thought he meant, like at the diner," she said with a sheepish grin. The judge, still clearly amused, smiled at her with kindness. "Well, Emma, you certainly brightened up this courtroom today. I think we could all use a little cheeseburger break after this." Grace, still trying to hide her embarrassment but now laughing along with everyone else, ruffled Emma's hair. "It's okay, sweetheart. You just made the whole room smile." Emma, now realizing that her misunderstanding had lightened the mood rather than causing a problem, smiled shyly and whispered, "I'm glad I made people happy." The tension in the courtroom had completely dissipated, and the atmosphere shifted from one of formality and stress to something lighter, more human. For a brief moment, Emma's innocence had turned an otherwise tense situation into a memory that everyone in the room would carry with them. Even the lawyers and the judge seemed more at ease, and the trial continued on, but the lightness from Emma's unintentional humor lingered in the air. As the courtroom slowly returned to its usual rhythm, with lawyers flipping through pages of evidence and the judge resuming his solemn role, the atmosphere felt different. The tense air that had settled over everyone before Emma's innocent response had lifted, replaced by a sense of warmth that seemed to linger. It was as though the heavy weight of legal matters had momentarily been lifted by something pure and simple, the unintentional humor of a child's perspective. The lawyers, who had been deeply engrossed in their arguments, now exchanged knowing smiles and small chuckles. One of the defense attorneys, who had been particularly serious during the proceedings, gave an amused glance at Emma before turning back to his notes. Even the court reporter, who had been typing away in rapid succession, paused for a brief second, her lips curling into a smile as she reflected on the unexpected moment. For Grace, the effects of the misunderstanding were profound. Though she had initially felt embarrassed, worried about how her daughter's words might have disrupted the seriousness of the trial, she soon realized that the situation had provided a welcome break from the tension. Grace noticed that the weight on her shoulders had lightened, her constant anxiety, her fear of what would happen next, had dissipated, if only for a little while. In the midst of the legal jargon and stressful moments, Emma's innocent mistake had reminded her of the importance of laughter, even in the most difficult circumstances. She looked over at Emma, who was now sitting quietly, her small hands folded in her lap, a shy smile on her face. Emma's innocent mistake hadn't just broken the tension, it had brought a sense of humanity into the room. Grace couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Her daughter's pure heart and simple response had made the courtroom feel less like an intimidating place and more like a shared space where people could be human with one another, where smiles and laughter could still be found amidst the formality. The judge, too, felt the impact of the moment. As the trial continued, he found himself more at ease, even as the case went on to more complicated matters. The ripple effect of Emma's innocent answer had softened the often rigid, impersonal atmosphere of the courtroom. For a brief moment, everyone had been reminded that they weren't just legal professionals or litigants, but individuals who could find joy in the small, unexpected moments of life. When the proceedings ended and the judge called for a short recess, the courtroom buzzed with a quieter, more relaxed energy. Some of the lawyers discussed the case in hushed tones, while others exchanged pleasantries. Emma, still unsure of the full weight of what had just happened, felt a bit of relief wash over her. She was happy that things seemed calmer now. Grace, noticing her daughter's more relaxed demeanor, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did a great job, Emma," Grace said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. "You made everyone feel better." Emma smiled up at her mother, still trying to piece together the events of the day. "I didn't mean to make people laugh, but I'm glad I did." Grace's heart swelled with love for her daughter, grateful that in the middle of all the stress and uncertainty, Emma's simple innocence had brought something unexpected yet beautiful into their lives. The impact of that moment, the laughter it had sparked, would stay with both of them long after the trial was over, an unforgettable reminder of how sometimes, even the smallest moments could create the biggest shifts in the most unexpected places. As the trial finally came to a close, Grace felt a sense of relief wash over her, though the outcome of the case was still uncertain. The hours in the courtroom had been long, and the tension had been palpable, but somehow, Emma's innocent mistake had made everything feel a little less daunting. The courtroom no longer felt like an intimidating, cold place. Instead, it was a space where people could breathe, smile, and even laugh, if only for a moment. Grace looked over at her daughter, who was now quietly drawing on a piece of paper she'd found in her bag. Emma had resumed her usual cheerful demeanor, unfazed by the complexities of the case that had surrounded them for hours. The young girl's face was serene, her mind clearly far from the stresses of the day. Grace admired her for that. Emma, with her innocence and ability to find joy in even the simplest of moments, had reminded Grace that sometimes, the best way to cope with the weight of the world was to embrace the little things. The judge wrapped up the final statements, and as the courtroom began to empty, Grace felt her heart lighten. The outcome of the case was still pending, but the burden she had carried for so long seemed just a little less heavy now. There was something about that moment of laughter, that innocent confusion over the word order, that had shifted her perspective. It had reminded her that life wasn't just about the serious, difficult moments. Sometimes, it was about finding the joy, the laughter, and the human connection in the most unexpected places. As they left the courtroom, Grace held Emma's hand tightly, a soft smile on her lips. "You did amazing today, sweetheart," she said softly. Emma beamed up at her, her eyes sparkling. "I'm just glad everyone's happy now," she replied innocently. Grace chuckled, bending down to kiss her daughter's forehead. "You've got a way of making people happy, my love," she said, her voice filled with pride. As they stepped out into the bright afternoon sunlight, the world felt just a little brighter. The weight of the trial might not have been fully lifted, and the outcome of the case was still to be determined, but for now, Grace was content. They had made it through the day, and in the midst of it all, Emma had given her something far more valuable than the resolution of a legal dispute, a reminder of the power of laughter, of innocence, and of finding moments of peace even when the world seemed uncertain. Hand in hand, mother and daughter walked down the courthouse steps together, the laughter from the courtroom still echoing in their hearts. Whatever came next, they knew they would face it together, stronger, lighter, and with a renewed sense of the little things that made life beautiful.